Hello, this is Brian's Adventure Vlog. Thank you for tuning in. This last week on Monday, Mount Washington broke its all-time February wind record. The wind speed was 171 miles per hour. Now, to put that in perspective, once the wind reaches 90 miles per hour, you can pretty much no longer walk. It becomes very difficult to walk. At 120 miles per hour, you get blown down. 171 miles per hour, if you're on top of Mount Washington when that wind hit, you're probably somewhere in Oz by then. To commemorate the wind event on Mount Washington, I decided to tell you one of my stories from backpacking in Alaska back in 1995. We had reached Wrangell St. Elias National Park. That's the largest national park in the country, and it butts up against Kewaunee National Park in Yukon, Canada. Now, together they make up a World Heritage Site, which is pretty much the largest wilderness area in the world. It's about the size of North Dakota, and there's nothing there. All mountains, huge amounts of glaciers. It's a very rugged and intimidating location. And it's pretty much quintessential Alaska. When you think of Alaska, you're really thinking of Wrangell St. Elias National Park. The trail followed the Kuskalana River, and our plan was to make it to an old gold miner's cabin at the foot of Mount Blackburn. And then we would use that as a base to alpine backpack around to the backside of Mount Blackburn to the top, as long as the weather would hold. But it seemed like that was a good possibility at the time. It was sprinkling a little bit. It looked like it was going to clear, so we had high hopes that the weather would hold. After 10 miles of backpacking, we decided to make camp. We set up the tent, we had dinner, we decided to bed down for the night. We're inside the tent, I started to fall asleep, and after about 45 minutes, a sound woke me up, and I woke up thinking, you know, I think there's a military jet flying to the south of us. You know, it was kind of this loud humming noise, almost like a distant rumble of engines roaring. And over time, the sound of those jet engines filled the horizon. And after about 5 minutes, I realized that rumbling can't be a jet engine. It's just too voluminous. I was starting to think at some point that this was a tornado. I mean, it was getting loud. And once that thing got closer and closer, John and I both bolted up out of our sleeping bags, pretty concerned about what was about to happen. Just took a few minutes till that rumbling noise got close enough that we could hear trees popping and cracking and smashing into each other, and we knew we were in trouble. Those winds came in like a freight train. Then a tremendous blast hit the tent, and the tent squatted down to about half its height, and the sides of that tent were rumbling and thundering just completely violently, and it was terrifying. And we could hear limbs crashing, we could hear trees falling to the ground. And in that chaos, in my mind, I was absolutely preparing for the trees around us to fall and crush us and kill us. After that initial blast passed, I was hoping that would be it, but that wasn't true. Wind came in like waves of a hurricane. The tent would thunder. The whole front of the tent fell apart. Meanwhile, in the midst of all of this, there were torrential downpours of rain outside. Each blast of wind was worse than the next, and this lasted most of the night. So I think the winds hit probably around 7 p.m. and it didn't die down until about 4 a.m. At that point, the thundering of the wind died down just enough for me to fall asleep. And I was thankful because that whole night felt like a week. So that morning around 7 a.m., I woke up. It was a little brighter. There were no winds. It stopped raining. And I thought, I'm going to check things out. I crawled out of my sleeping bag, crawled through the down part of the tent, unzipped and opened it up, and I half expected to see that we were in Oz somewhere, the Lollipop Kids or something like that. Parts of my tent were blowing all over the place. The vestibule was 40 feet away, tent poles were here, tent poles were there, but all in all, everything was intact. Nothing was ripped, nothing was broken. Our tent actually survived. The irony about all this is my tent was built to withstand winds up to 120 miles per hour, but in the reverse orientation. Had our vestibule not been facing south and had been facing north, the tent probably wouldn't have blown apart and it probably wouldn't have thundered and buffeted quite so bad. But, you know, there wasn't any wind whenever we set up the tent, so there's no way to prepare for that. And the winds were so bad that we couldn't get out of the tent, move the tent around. I mean, the tent was just blown away. We eventually packed up camp and headed down the trail in a sleep-deprived stupor. We were exhausted. It's one of those things where your eyes are trying to slam shut as you're hiking along. It was It was pretty exhausting, that ordeal. We eventually met up with two guys that were packing out, and they had been staying in the gold miners' cabin that night, and they could not believe that we stayed in a tent in that storm that night. It was that severe. They said they couldn't sleep inside the cabin. That's how loud it was. We got to the gold miners' cabin. We crossed a horrendously flooded and freezing glacier-fed stream to get there. That's a whole different story. But the fog and the gray clouds enveloped Mount Blackburn, so we never got a chance to climb it. I decided to check into this windstorm that we lived through. I thought it was such a bad storm, there must be some type of record of this. So I contacted Wrangell St. Elias National Park and inquired with them. And this gentleman, Ranger Mike, got back to me, and he sent me a link to the NOAA storm database. And so I looked into that, and I entered in September of 1995. I looked down through the storms, looked for the date that we were there. And it turned out that this was no ordinary storm. We had camped out in the remnants of a typhoon. This was Typhoon Oscar that devastated Japan, and that thing floated over the Pacific up into Alaska and hit us. According to the storm database, winds ranged from 40 to 70 miles per hour in that part of Wrangell St. Elias National Park. Now, had we been backpacking in the Kenai Peninsula, winds were exceeding 120 miles per hour out on the Kenai, and that is just crazy. Back then in 1995, radio coverage in Alaska wasn't that great, and it still probably isn't. I mean, you have too great of a distance between towns for you to catch radio too much. And then when you do drive into the town, you don't know what station to listen to. So most of the time we just had static. That caused a problem with our planning because we didn't get really any weather forecasts, especially for that trip. Once we made it to Wrangell, there's no radio in Wrangell St. Elias National Park, at least not back then. And so we had no idea a typhoon was coming, and neither did the park ranger that we spoke with, because we had met with him just the day before we went on this trek, and he suggested the route that we went on, and he made no mention of bad weather. This is Brian's adventure vlog. Be safe and live the adventure.